Hey everyone, Cool Kid here. Let me just put this on real quick. So, welcome to another part of the production commentary series that I've been doing lately. I decided that for this one, as opposed to what I've been doing, where I've been going through them from like old to recent, I wanted to do my most recent video, and that was for a couple of reasons. This music, I feel like it's probably a little bit loud, but it should be fine for you guys because I have the volume adjusted. Anyways, so I wanted to do this video so recently after this one came out for the Astronomy of Warframe Mercury video, because I felt like while it was fresh on my mind, I wanted to talk about it and, like, you know, the editing that went into it and stuff like that. So I thought this would be an interesting opportunity to give that a try and see if this strategy works any better. So we'll see. Considering it's so much, like, fresher on my mind, I think a lot of the, like, discussion of the process will be a lot more relevant. This is also my editing software, Resolve. You'll see my whole desktop right now, and you can't see it because I'm covering it up, but the time is currently, if I cover myself up, the time is currently 4 o'clock in the morning. So I've been wanting to record this all day, but I got a bit busy, and so I'm getting around to it now. So this is DaVinci Resolve, my editing software. This is the main panel I do most of my stuff in edit. We have my bins up here for organization, but you can see a few different things here. I typically divide it into... Oh, that was weird. This is going to cause... There's going to be some visual issues when we're working with this. I'm just going to warn you now. So you might see things like flicker from time to time. But so typically I divide it into 3 bins. I have assets, audio, and footage, and then I break them down from there into subsections. So like this was all the periodic table cards that I needed. And then the combined asset that I made in GIMP, which is an editing software for images. I had this section for all the resources for the node name part. All those images and things like that, just to keep it all separate so it was easier to find. And then this is like a kind of just every other asset. This was not particularly organized, I'm not gonna lie. And then audio I usually split up into voiceover, and then the music tracks that I use. Some in here didn't get used, but I kind of just import stuff and mess around with it until I find something that I like. This folder is not normally here, and I kind of want to talk about something that's kind of more broad. So the first thing I want to address is I have a lot more, maybe people have noticed this in this video, but there's a lot more like transitions. You can see those little white things down here. Those are transitions. And I normally would just have jump cuts between footage, but in this video I really wanted to like soften the editing style for most of it. There are some things like this joke here with the like the Space Ninjas and whatnot part where I didn't do it, but I really wanted to try and soften the editing style because I felt like it would be less harsh to watch, if that makes sense. So aside from jokes where the jump cut was part of the joke, I wanted it to be a lot easier on the eyes, considering the subject matter. So the other thing I want to mention is this. This footage from Space Engine uses the built-in tool for making camera paths in Space Engine and exporting them as videos. And so when I was working on this video, I had this problem where whenever I was over a piece of footage from the camera path editor, it wouldn't work correctly. Like, it would constantly show up with a red box that said media offline. If media offline shows up, that normally means that the file path is missing. So, like, if I deleted this footage from its folder, then it would show media offline because it can't find the media anymore. It's not linked. But it was showing up like it was flickering. And I was really confused by that, but I didn't think much of it because I could still work on the video. It just kind of lagged my software. But I went down here into the Deliver tab and I went to go render it. It kept stopping every time it reached footage that was from the in-game camera path editor. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? So I stayed up for like 2 hours trying to figure it out. And I found out that the reason it was having problems is because the in-game camera path tool doesn't export videos that are at a consistent frame rate. The frame rate is variable. And so because of that, Resolve was thinking that there were missing frames, so that was why it was flickering, because the missing information was that the frame rate wasn't consistent. So I had to download another piece of software called Handbrake and make the frame rate consistent, and then re-export all of the footage I used and put it back into the timeline. So that was annoying, and I didn't upload the video, or I didn't finalize the video until like 7 a.m. because I had been up for so long trying to figure out what the problem was. So I kind of just wanted to mention those things. I'm going to go ahead and kill the music for now. So we're going to go through this and I'm going to sort of talk about the way that things were developed. The lack of background music might be a little bit jarring. I can't really leave it running, I feel like, for this. It'll probably just not work out great. So my apologies for that. Also, I'm messing with the noise gate on the microphone, so let me know if you can hear too much background noise or if it's cutting off my words and things like that. I'm trying to tweak it to be better. Anyhow, I'm going to go ahead and get this rolling. Hey everyone, Cool Kid here. Something that I think is kind of underappreciated about Warframe is I'm already going to stop it for something I should have mentioned a second ago. Huge thank you to Flary for explaining to me how to clip out of the orbiter. All of this footage is taken with the Captura camera after I clipped out of the orbiter in Captura, and they were the one that showed me the trick. So huge thank you to Flary. If they did not show me that, none of this footage would exist. The best thing I could think of was to like get my head stuck through the glass, and then I took screenshots with that. And that's like, this footage is from that trick. I pushed my head through the orbiter glass and then detached the Captura camera, and I filmed this that way because it was So weird thing, right? You might notice this footage. You can see as I'm dragging here. See how Mercury's moving? This footage is actually like animated because I was passing time in the game. If you are outside the orbiter skybox and you try and advance time in Captura, it will teleport you back inside the orbiter. But the teleport volume only triggers when time is passing. So if you might notice in this footage, nothing in the skybox is actually moving. It's all camera motion. That's kind of the illusion I tried to create because nothing could move if I wanted shots like this. Was I moved the camera a lot so it would look like something was moving and you wouldn't notice it was basically a still image. It wasn't quite the same as a still image. The camera itself is still moving. You can see with like the Europa skybox here how the like the fog is changing over there. But it was kind of a trick I had to use because I was like, well, I want there to still be motion. I don't want this to be boring, but at the same time, I can't get the kind of shot I want if I, you know, do it this way, because if I progress time, it'll kick me into the orbiter again. What I've underappreciated about Warframe is that it's a game that takes place in space, or more specifically, our own solar system. Unlike a lot of other sci-fi franchises that take place... you can see there's like the softer transitions. That'll be a recurring thing throughout this entire video. In distant star systems, Warframe being in our own solar neighborhood gives it the opportunity to do cool and creative fiction with celestial bodies that actually exist. This setting has allowed DE to bend the planets into work. This skybox is really cool, by the way. There's Pluto's largest moon, Charon, and it's like been destroyed, and there's all this debris coming off of it. Weirdly enough, nothing is really done with this in-game, but I love the way it looks, and I hope we get some elaboration at some point about what's going on there. Planets of the star chart in really cool ways, and I think it's not talked about enough. So, in this series, I'm going to talk about the various locations we explore throughout the star chart, what they're like in real life, what they're like in Warframe, and what in-universe lore explains the differences. Despite this being a very inherently nerdy topic, I also just want to say, this is recycled footage. I think it's from Is Damage Reduction Dead? This footage with Mag I just recycled because I really liked the way it looked. My Mag's color scheme is based on my Railjack, so it fit the space theme, and then, you know, like the sort of asteroid situation going on in the background. So this is recycled, but I thought it looked good, so I'm just going to keep using it. I'm going to do my best to make this series as accessible as possible, so aside from some very basic science terminology, you won't need any pre-existing space knowledge for this series to make sense. At least that's how it'll work if I don't suck at my job. For our first episode, I think it's only right to explore Mercury, the closest planet to the sun and the first of the terrestrial. Mercury skybox here was a little, like, I feel like it moves so slowly that I'm not sure if I should have added more camera motion or not, to be honest. Planets, those being the rocky innermost planets of Mercury, Venus, Earth, and Mars. While this is ultimately a Warframe video, I'm going to give a rundown of what Mercury is like in real life so you can have a solid basis to understand how Warframe differs from reality. I also just want to make the comment that several people said in the comments that they completely forgot this was a Warframe video multiple times, which I think is funny, but is also kind of a good thing. You know what, sure, this is kind of off topic. All right, it's still on topic, but a little bit of a tangent. The response to this video has been much better than I expected it. Like, I didn't expect it to get shit for views, and it didn't. I'll just be perfectly honest with you all. This video performed terribly. I think it's the 8th best performing out of my last 10, so it is bottom 3 in terms of views in its first day. But I didn't expect it to do that well. My main concern was if the people that did watch it, did they like it? Because I was not sure if I could do something like this. I've never made a video that's like this at all before, and it was very experimental. So I was really worried that I was just going to drop the ball and it wasn't going to be good. The early reactions from members were very good, and so that gave me some hope, but I was very nervous releasing it to the public. Like, originally, I was up, I couldn't really sleep. It was like 6 or 7 a.m. And I went ahead and just set the video to public, and I'm like, I'll read what people say about it, when I wake up tomorrow. And then I was up for another couple hours because my dog likes to keep me awake because she's a little rat bastard. And when I went to sleep that night, I had a nightmare that I was writing a community tab post apologizing for making this video because it went over that poorly. I was like that stressed out about it. And it made me realize as I was thinking about it once I woke up, like, this video is very personal to me in a lot of ways. All of the things I make are, obviously, but this is like combining two things I've been passionate about for most of my life. And so the fear, like on some internal level, that people were going to reject this video and I wasn't going to get to make the series I wanted to because people just didn't like it was really high at the time. But fortunately, this video has been received very well. It has a very high comment to view ratio, and I'm pretty sure a fairly high like to view ratio as well, which is very reassuring. Like I said, not many people actually watched the video, but those who did seem to really enjoy it, which is reassuring. So I do still plan on moving forward with the rest of the series. I was just really nervous people weren't going to like it. Aside from the obvious stuff like the space ninjas and whatnot, Mercury is, like the rest of the planets, named after a Roman god, being Mercurius. Something I want to point out in the editing software, you might notice if I zoom in a bit, these are fade-in effects. So like I can set the time signature on them. I abuse this constantly. You see how like it's now taking way longer to fade in? This is kind of like my transition method of choice for getting assets on screen, because if they just appear, it looks super jarring. Like, so just to visualize. Being Mercurius. See, it takes like a second. After a Roman god. Being Mercurius. If I were to not do that, if I were to just like set it so that there was nothing. It's named after a Roman god, being Mercury. The way it just pops in is really jarring. So I abuse this in my videos a lot. There are probably fancier ways to do it. And in fact, some of my videos do actually use fancier methods, which once we do making summons overpowered with the stuff I've already made for that video, we'll talk more in depth about some of the tricks I've used for that, because it does have some more advanced editing. Sorry, I bumped my mic. My apologies if that came through the recording. But that we're going to talk about some of the more, I guess I say advanced with air quotes, engineering that went into that video, or what exists of it. But this is just kind of a basic thing to explain what you're seeing. And I kind of want to continue to do that with like the editing tricks I use, just to kind of make it a little bit more clear. He was associated with things like commerce, communication, travel, trickery, luck, and thieves, and he also served as both the messenger of the gods and a guide for souls who were entering the underworld. I also will say there's a lot more stuff Mercury was associated with. It was just too much to explain. There are so many different things for like, because oftentimes in mythology, gods are associated with a bunch of stuff to the point where they kind of overlap. Like Mercury and Terminus kind of overlap in some ways. So, and I'm also not an expert when it comes to mythology. I'm not really an expert when it comes to astronomy either, but I know way more about it than mythology. So, I was just kind of like, I feel like if I like really dive into this, I'm just gonna fucking botch it because I don't know anything. So I kind of tried to keep a lot of the mythological discussions somewhat scant for that reason, which I will probably continue to do throughout the series, because it's just not like my area of expertise. If you're more familiar with Greek mythology, Hermes is the analog for Mercury, as much of Roman mythology is just stealing. I should also mention that, as has been pointed out to me, the Roman gods did like exist before the Greek ones. It was just that a commenter left a really insightful comment about this. The Romans saw Greek civilization as more civilized, and so they kind of, or as they saw them as very civilized, I guess I should say. So they kind of absorbed a lot of their myth into their own pre-existing religion because of they were, fanboys or whatever the fuck. So that was just an interesting comment someone had left, so kind of explaining the strong associations between a lot of the Roman and Greek gods, despite them, existing before that sort of merge ever happened. Much of what we know about Mercury was gathered over two NASA missions, those being Mariner 10 in 1974 and 7. I do want to also just explain something real quick. You might notice whenever I show the photos for Mariner and Messenger, the background blurs. This is something I also use a lot. Of the tabs down here, this one, Fusion, allows you to use video effects. This is just a very basic blur. You have the input and output nodes here, and then you can pop stuff in. So like, this is like a menu of all the different stuff that you can do. And then the things here, up here, this is keyframing. So you just basically set a start and then an end, and the computer will kind of work out the transition between the two. So I try to do this a lot for things that appear when I have an asset over footage. I try to blur the footage to make it less distracting. The problem is the footage kind of gets really smeary, and I don't know if I should have blurred it or not, to be honest, but I felt like not blurring it just kind of looked worse. So it was kind of almost a lesser of two evils situation, to be honest with you. Mariner 10 in 1974 and 75, and Messenger in 2008 up to 2015. Quick side note, Messenger might be the worst acronym I've ever seen. Look at this. It stands for Mercury Surface, Space Environment, Geochemistry, and Ranging. And just... Okay, this is another thing I want to explain just as an effect. I've talked about, like, I want to talk about the engineering of my videos, but people are going to cry when they see it because it's so jank. The text effect for this, like, list fading in, I'm cropping the text box. If I pull up that tool, this is the text box right now. Full size, it looks like this, but I have a keyframe here so that it's hidden. And then as I explain things, it will progressively reveal more and more of the text box by moving the crop. One thing as well, maybe some people spotted this in the video, if I hide this, the bottom of the border on the Y is cut off because the crop isn't quite good. You know, bad crop, we're gonna starve. So that was a bit of a fuck up on my part that I didn't notice until this was so late in production. I was like, I'm not fucking fixing that shit. Space environment, geochemistry, and ranging. And just, who structures an acronym like this? Regardless, something you might immediately notice is that we've only sent 2 missions to Mercury, and they were over 30 years apart. Despite it being fairly close to Earth, Mercury is incredibly difficult to explore due to its proximity to the Sun, which presents a lot of challenges with both the extreme temperature and the gravity of the Sun itself. I have a lot to say about Mariner and Messenger, but something I do want to say, I mentioned that the gravity of the sun causes problems for the probes. This was pointed out to me by a couple of comments. That's not really accurate. The source I had read talked about how Mercury's proximity to the sun causes problems for probes, missing Mercury, essentially. They can't slow down. And the way I had read it, I had thought that what it was saying was that the probes were like the gravity of the sun was stronger because they were closer, so the probes had to use more like thrust to slow down. And so, like, I think the falling into the sun was not the term I should have used, but how I had interpreted it when I had read it was, I think, incorrect. What was explained to me by a few comments is that the main reason that the proximity is such a problem other than the heat is actually because Mercury moves so fast, because it orbits so quickly, that it's much more difficult to land on it. Especially because there's still the issue of like missing it and having to slow down. And I'll talk about this a little bit more because there's a lot to say about Messenger that I didn't get to in this video because I just didn't have the time and it wasn't really relevant, but there's a lot that's really cool about it. For reference, Mercury is on average about 0.4 astronomical units from the Sun, with 1 astronomical unit being the distance between the Sun and the Earth. Because of the close proximity, any probes sent to the region have to be equipped with advanced heat resistance to survive. Yeah, this is something nice about photos from NASA. They're all public domain. So this is an artist's depiction of Messenger in orbit around Mercury, but this is public domain because NASA was the one who made it. And then, yeah, there's the large silver heat shield that Messenger had. And lots of clever tricks have to be used to keep any would-be explorers from being pulled in by the sun's gravity. Yeah, that part's not quite accurate. Like I said, it's more an issue of how quickly Mercury moves, not necessarily the gravity of the sun. I had misinterpreted the source I read. The stories and logistics of both Mariner and Messenger are incredibly interesting, and I'll leave some resources in the description if you want to learn more about them. But I really wanted to talk about these more. Like, when I was working on this video, I wanted to write them into the script, but they just weren't relevant, because Mariner and Messenger are both very interesting. Mariner in the 70s was... you might have noticed I said Mariner 10. That's because Mariner was a program that launched a lot more probes than just Mariner 10, and they were flyby images of primarily Mars and Venus, but we did get, you know, the one of Mercury with Mariner 10. But Messenger was really interesting. So one of the problems, like I mentioned with exploring Mercury, is that it's hard to slow down once you get close to it. And so if you need to slow the probe down, normally you do that with thrusters. The problem is thrusters require fuel, and fuel is heavy. And then it takes more work to get that off the ground out into space. So the cost balloons and it becomes logistically harder. So after Mariner, which was just a flyby. Like I said, it didn't stay in orbit around Mercury, as far as I'm aware. It was like a flyby. Um, NASA just kind of disregarded doing anything more with it. But there was a scientist who, I can't think of their name, but they put forward this really interesting model where basically what would happen is instead of bringing more thrust into space, more fuel for the thrust, they were going to make it so that Messenger would orbit around the Earth a few times, and then orbit around Venus a few times, and then orbit around Mercury and the Sun a few times. And the goal was that the atmospheres of Earth and Venus, as well as just like the its process in taking those long orbits around the Sun and Mercury, would slow the probe down enough that it would be able to actually enter Mercury's orbit. And once NASA kind of validated the validity of that strategy, they sent Messenger on that route. And it took 6.5 years, but Messenger did arrive at Mercury. And I'm pretty sure its mission was supposed to end in 2012, but it remained operational up through 2015. So I think that's something that's really interesting because Messenger really shows like the scientific rigor of, NASA and just modern science in general. The mathematics that would have to be employed to do something like that have to be so crazy precise, and yet we were still able to send this probe tens of millions of kilometers away from home to this planet that was incredibly difficult to explore, and it was able to remain in orbit around it for 7 years, remaining in contact with Earth, the vast majority of that time. I just think it's crazy to think about that we pulled that off. But the reason I bring them up in this video is because almost all of the real-life pictures I'm going to show you today are going to be from these two missions. I'm also going to be showing a lot of footage from the program's Space Engine to show off. I love Space Engine, but god, the in-game camera path editor frame rate thing I mentioned earlier pissed me off so much. Off Mercury, including using an in-game texture pack that uses real images from Messenger. That's a little more complicated than that. Space Engine has a page explaining it, but there's also, they use like a DeviantArt member of all things, contributed like a map for the depth in game and stuff like that as well. So it's a little bit more complicated than just that, but it is almost entirely images from Messenger for the textures as I understand it. The texture packs for each of the solar system's planets add up to like 70 gigabytes. They're fucking huge. I'm also going to use Universe Sandbox a bit, but that's neither here nor there. I didn't give Universe Sandbox enough credit. I didn't expect to use it as much as I did in this video. It was an incredibly helpful program. So, onto the planet itself. This transition just lags every time I view it in the editor. Yeah. Mercury is roughly 1/3 the size of Earth and has no natural. I also use this is kind of like a subtle, almost Easter egg. The Calamity music for the Brimstone Crag biome because it's a hot part of hell. And someone did actually catch that, and I'm glad that somebody realized what I was going for there. Saddle. Oh, it's tweaking. Or anything of that sort. My editing software is a little bit finicky sometimes. You'll have to bear with it. I mentioned earlier that Mercury is about 2/5 of the distance between the Earth and the Sun, but you might have noticed I said on average. That's because Mercury has the most eccentric orbit of all the planets, meaning that its orbit is very elliptical, and its actual distance from the Sun varies wildly at different points in its year. I'm not sure if this footage is very good because the sun's lens flare is so bad, but I couldn't find a way to reduce it, so I just had to live with it. Here on Earth, seasons come from the planet tilting on its axis by about 23.5 degrees. Another thing, so I think I'm probably going to bring this up again in the moon episode, but you might notice in this shot, there are no stars, but in this one, there are, and in a lot of the footage there is, like there's stars in this shot and stuff too. So there is like, you can set different photo levels or like photo exposure settings. And normally if you set it to auto, it would do something like this, where I think this one is HDR, and so you can see all the background stuff. But like in real life, you wouldn't see anything. Mercury would be too bright. Because something I thought was really interesting was photos from the moon. There's the very infamous photo. Let me see if I can pull it up actually. I think I can probably find this. The Earth from the Moon one from Apollo 11 or whatever. I think it's called Earthrise. Yeah, this photo. Let me grab this. It was taken by, yeah, Apollo 8 astronaut William Anders. So, let me grab this. Because I thought part of why I think this image is so fascinating is because hold on, I'm just going to hide the display capture for a second. Huh. That's not supposed to be there. Anyways, the thing for Let me grab this. I just don't want to show all my file directories, and I have to show the entire thing, so we're just kind of... Where the fuck did that save to, actually? What the fuck? Hold on. Technical difficulties. I'm fucking up the whole video right now. It's okay. It's saved in the wrong folder. Sorry, everyone. This is probably a miserable viewing experience, but you're going to have to bear with me for a second while I figure this out. Okay, this photo here. Turn back on the display capture. This photo here. Something really captivated me about this photo, not only because it's kind of crazy that this even exists, but you might notice there are no stars in this image. And I thought that was really weird. I'm like, we're in space. There's no atmosphere. Where are all the stars in this image? And so doing some research, the reason there are no stars in this image is because Earth is too bright and the surface of the moon is too bright. I believe it's primarily that Earth is too bright. So, like, you can't see anything because it's just overpowering all the other light, which I thought was really interesting because I wouldn't have expected it to be bright enough to do that. But yeah, there are no stars in this image. I mean, that's obviously partially like camera settings and stuff like that too, don't get me wrong, but the brightness of Earth causes a lot of that, which I think is really, really interesting. And it tilting on its axis by about 23.5. I should probably mention I brought that up just to kind of highlight how, like, in real life, none of the stars would be visible because of that effect. Half degrees. On Mercury, though, seasons come from this wild variance in distance to the sun, where it's just shy of 70 million kilometers at aphelion, which is its farthest point from the sun, and 46 million kilometers at perihelion, which is its closest point to the sun. As you might notice, explaining this was also a little bit nerve-wracking because of words like aphelion and perihelion, but it seems like people caught on. That means Mercury is a whole 24 million kilometers closer to the sun at its nearest point. I also just want to say I should have used astronomical units for this part, because astronomical units, like I mentioned earlier, are... An astronomical unit is the distance between Earth and the sun. So astronomical units gives you a much better idea of distance, in my opinion, because you can compare it to, you know, it's relative to Earth, right? So it's a lot easier to intuitively grasp. So I think in future episodes, I'm going to use AU instead of kilometers for that reason. And its farthest, which is important for a lot of reasons. One of the big ones is that, because the distance varies so wildly, the sun's... This footage was such a bitch to get. Space Engine has this kind of issue, because if you might notice, let me just play this, you'll just watch what's happening. Its gravity is more or less impactful on... See how Mercury's orbiting around the sun, slowly moving? The sun is relatively centered. The problem is, Space Engine simulates a lot of things, including the sun's motion around the galactic center. Recording this footage was a fucking nightmare, because the sun would not stay in the middle of the screen, and it took me like 10 minutes to figure out the right speed to get this to work. I'm pretty sure that this footage, if elongated, drifts out of sync, like right after it ends. As gravity increases in strength the closer two objects are to each other. This gravitational effect causes immense amounts of friction within the planet itself, and creates an effect called tidal heating, which keeps the planet's iron core molten. I wish I could have explained this a little bit more, because I feel like I felt like going more in depth about tidal heating and stuff probably wasn't going to be helpful. But at the same time, I wonder if I didn't explain it well enough, especially with the magnetosphere section. Explaining, like, why does a molten iron core produce a magnetosphere? I thought about trying to work that into the script, but I was like, is this really relevant to literally anything? And the answer was just kind of not really. So I might bring it up in an episode for, like, Earth or something like that, because, you know, a big part of why life exists here is because of the magnetosphere. Might be worth kind of going more in depth about that process in that video, but for this one, I was just like, does it really fit? And I felt like the answer was just no. Allowing it to form a weak magnetosphere. A magnetosphere is a large area around a given astronomical... Also, I just want to say thank fuck Universe Sandbox. Literally just updated to allow you to see the magnetospheres for planets. When I found out you couldn't view it in Space Engine, I had no idea what I was going to do. Astronomical object that, for the purposes of most planets, serves to protect them from solar wind, which is a constant stream of charged particles that radiate outwards from the sun. I should also mention that I'm reasonably certain that solar wind radiating outward from the sun kind of creates this giant structure in the solar system called the heliopause, and it is the largest continuous structure in the entire solar system, which I think is interesting. Again, not relevant for the video, but you're going to hear a lot of, you know, shit like this as we're watching this. There's a lot of stuff I wanted to include in this I couldn't, so you're just going to hear it now, basically. This magnetic field is only about 1.1% as strong as Earth's, but it's enough to protect the planet from the sun's solar wind, which is something even Mars can't do. Now, as we're talking about the planet's orbit, you're probably wondering, what's a year like on Mercury? Well, that takes 88 days. This is kind of a minor thing. I tried to play around with the scale of the text a lot more in this video. Like, you might notice the font size is 121 for the bottom row, but 99 for the top row. I thought it would be better to kind of like, I felt like it visually looked better, so I was trying to mix that up quite a bit as well. Sometimes it works better than others, I think, but it's something I'm trying to play with more. Which is actually part of why the planet is called Mercury, as it zips so quickly around the sun that it was associated with its namesake speedy messenger god. Aside from the short year, the close proximity to the sun also creates a very interesting gravitational effect called a spin-orbit resonance. I think that this is going to be a lot of fun to talk about in future, because I mentioned in a little bit that moons do this a lot too, but spin-orbit resonances are a thing you see in space sometimes, and I think they're really, really interesting. Mercury's spin-orbit resonance. Oh, sorry, it's freaking out again. Which means that for every 3 times Mercury spins about its axis, it revolves around the sun twice. To understand why this is significant, I need to explain that there are actually 2 different kinds of days in astronomy. The sidereal. I also just want to say I didn't blur this footage because it looked really bad. Because I was thinking about it for these assets, but I just put like outlines around the text or like boxes around the text to make them easier to see. Like, just to show, where is Open Infusion page? Here it is. If I were to add a blur to this, it just looks really bad. So normally I set the blur to like 8 to 10. Do you see what I mean? All of the stars, because this footage is so detailed, all the stars just disappear. And it just, I didn't think it looked good. So I just was like, you know what? We're just going to not do it and hope it doesn't cause problems. Because the main problem, like this, it's probably not that bad. But if I, just for the sake of argument, let me set this up like I normally set it up. So go to the tab here, we'll set a keyframe, and then we'll set another keyframe here. I have to do this because if I just hit the Fusion tab, it'll go to whatever is at the top of the layer. So I'll do this, and then we're going to set both of these to 0 so that there's no blur. And then I will play it for like half a second. I had the wrong thing selected. 2 different kinds of data. And we'll set it to 8. So the transition is what looks bad. There are actually 2 different kinds. You see the way all the stars just kind of like get squished out? I need to explain that there are actually 2 different kinds of data. Yeah, I just didn't like the way that looked. I think it looks really bad. I just realized this is a 1080p video on my 1440p monitor. You might not even be able to see this now that I think about it. But I just think I didn't like the way it looked. So I just was like, you know what? We're just not going to bother with that. And I'm going to hope it doesn't cause problems. I think it came out fine visually, but maybe it's a little bit visually messy. The sidereal day, which is how long it takes a planet to complete 1 full rotation on its axis, and the solar day, which is measured from sunrise to sunrise. On Mercury, a sidereal day is about 58.65 Earth days, so it takes just shy of 59 days to fully rotate once. Because of that 3-2 spin-orbit resonance, though, a single solar day takes 176 Earth days, or 2 whole Mercurian years. I think this is really cool, and not even just that. I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. So there is something on Mercury. I don't think this is simulated in Space Engine, and I really, really wanted to include this fact in the video, but I could not find a way to make it fit. So if you were looking into the sky on Mercury, let me jump ahead a little bit just so you can see the sun. So if you were standing on the surface of Mercury, as it rotates around, it rotates on its axis, it revolves around the sun. The same side is facing the sun for about an entire year. The thing is, there is a point where the rotation speed of the planet and its revolution speed get a little bit weird. And what happens is the sun, it'll be at around like the noon, maybe 1 o'clock position, and it will stop and then move backwards a little bit and then start going again. If memory serves, it has to do with something like the rotation and the revolution speed like briefly match, and then they get kind of out of sync before lining back up to their normal cadence. So the sun stops in the sky, moves backwards, and then starts going again, which I think is really, really cool. The sun is about 7 times brighter on Mercury. We're not at this part of the video. I have to back it up. My bad. That side will be in constant darkness. This is because the planet is so close to the sun that the sun's gravity impacts its rotational speed, creating this spin-orbit resonance. This will come up a few other times in the series, primarily as it relates to moons, but it's very noteworthy for Mercury and will actually tie into some in-game lore later. Yeah, I don't feel like I really elaborated on that a ton. I had this section I had originally written for concepts for how to change Mercury's tile set that played into this more, but I just kind of cut it, so that line is not as relevant. It's not necessarily wrong, it was just going to be a lot more important in the original draft of this. So, oh, my shit's, oh, what the, okay, we're tweaking. The fundamentals of the planet's orbit, let's talk about geology. Because of its proximity to the sun, the daytime side of Mercury sits at a scorching 420 degrees Celsius on average, which is 790 degrees Fahrenheit for my fellow Americans. Or, Liberians or Canadians? If someone left a really funny comment about this. Apparently in Canada, and if any members are watching this are Canadian, please let me know if this is true. In Canada, they use Celsius for the temperature outside, but Fahrenheit on their ovens. I don't know if anywhere else is like that, but that's fucking hilarious. If you're from there, for some added perspective, the sun is about 7 times brighter on Mercury than it is on Earth, which might help explain the heat. Because there's no atmosphere to distribute all this heat, though, the nighttime side sits at an average of negative 170 degrees Celsius, or negative 270 Fahrenheit. It's important to note that Mercury has the lowest axial tilt of all planets, meaning it's not tilted on its axis almost. So this is a shot of the pole, and I was hoping that would be noticeable, because you can see that the planet rotates kind of into the shadow. If you see that, the planet kind of rotates into the shadow. But I mentioned how it has a really low axial tilt, and at a glance, this shit looks tilted as fuck. I wish I rotated this before I filmed it, but filming stuff in Space Engine was genuinely so difficult to a point that I was just like, you know what? I'm just fucking using it as is. Axis almost at all, which causes craters at the poles of the planet to be in a state of permanent shadow. These poles sit at about negative 93 degrees Celsius, and there's even evidence that water ice is likely present in these craters. I'm pretty sure that's actually been confirmed. I wrote likely because the resources I had been reading when I wrote the script said that it hadn't been confirmed yet, because it was like, or no, yeah, they were pretty old. A lot of it was comparing messenger data of the era to like things that we had found from telescopes on Earth. But I'm almost positive it has been confirmed now that there's actually quite a bit of water on Mercury, but specifically in these like polar regions. Speaking of craters, one of the most striking... I should also probably mention that we're pretty sure it got there from comet impacts, because comets are mostly ice. Immediately Resolve, please cooperate with me. Is that it's absolutely covered in them, showing its history of meteorite impacts over tens of millions of years. These meteor impacts also create large mountain ranges, alongside many ridges and plains. With how long these craters have been around, we can pretty confidently say that Mercury hasn't been geologically active in a very long time, as planets like Earth have processes such as plate tectonics to renew surface material, which is very obviously not happening here. There are several... It's interesting, too, because I'm pretty sure that we don't actually know if any other planet does plate tectonics like Earth does. I'm pretty sure there's evidence that Mars does, and Venus, for reasons we'll explore in the next episode, is hell and is basically impossible to do anything on, because it is just like, you know, your typical over 800 degrees Fahrenheit, 90 times atmospheric pressure kind of thing. Getting a probe onto Venus, I think the longest lasting one was like an hour and a half. So I don't think we know about the geology of it that much because its atmosphere is so thick. And I think there's some evidence Mars might be geologically active in that fashion. But I think it's kind of interesting that, you know, poor old Mercury here is just kind of fucked in that regard. Areas that have bound... God damn it. This is happening more than I expected. Volcanically active, though, with many of them being directly within the many impact craters dotting the Mercurian landscape. There are also several hollows regions that we think formed from volatile elements sublimating off the surface, as well as from things like radioactive decay. That part about volatile elements sublimating, I worry was not really that understandable. I feel like it was a lot more jargony than a lot of other parts. No one said that they didn't understand it yet, which is good, but I still wonder, like, maybe I shouldn't have written it that way. Please resolve. Ancient law don't fuck with me. Been seen, which leads to another very interesting point. Early in its history, Mercury was likely covered in a magma ocean. We know this because the chemical composition of Mercury's surface is highly heterogeneous, which just means it's chemically varied. I'm gonna be honest, I did not know what that word meant until I researched stuff for this video. Scientists think Mercury's geological features that can't be attributed to meteor impacts may be from the surface of the planet cooling faster than its interior, causing it to contract and crack. So, what... Oh, another thing I should also mention. This is in regards to the exosphere, actually, now that I think about it. You know what, we'll get to it in the exosphere part. It's easier to explain there. So, what is Mercury actually made of? Well, as far as we've analyzed, it's about 70% metallic compounds and 30% silicate. Weirdly, Space Engine says it's 60-40, but every resource I had read otherwise said it was 70-30, so I just went with that number. I'm gonna tweak this a bit. 30% silicate, with a mostly silicate crust and mantle leading into a metallic inner and outer core of mostly iron. This core is estimated to be about 57% of Mercury's total volume. This was Universe Sandbox coming in crazy clutch again. Thank God they had this. Mercury's total volume, which is also, yeah, the thing I was talking about with the varying text sizes, like the 57 is a different font size than the word core and this bottom stuff here. I don't know if it came out as well as I had hoped, but I thought it was something I wanted to play around with a bit more. Nuts. For comparison, Earth's core is only about 17% of its total volume. The crust, or outermost layer of the planet, is estimated to be about 35 kilometers, or 22 miles, thick, with the mantle and crust region adding up to a combined 420 kilometers, or 260 miles thick. I'm gonna be honest, I wonder if this was even relevant in the video. It's a very minor thing, but it's like, should I have even really talked about this much? Mercury is also the second densest of all the planets, at 5.427 grams per cubic centimeter, which is just a tad behind the densest planet in the solar system, that being Earth, at 5.515 grams per cubic centimeter. Because it's so dense, the surface gravity of Mercury is almost the same as Mars, despite being about 2/3 of Mars' size. I do think that's really interesting, but beyond that, I want to point something out. You notice this guy here, Mercury VO Editions.mp3. I made some changes to this video when I was working on it that required me to re-record some of my lines. A lot of that was bad pronunciations in the nodes section. You'll see a lot more stuff from VO Editions in there. But this section I had to re-record for the dumbest possible reason. I didn't have the right number for Earth's gravitational pull written down. Like, it's something that you learn that shit in high school, and for some reason, I wrote it down as 9.1 meters per second squared instead of 9.8. I literally could have just looked it up. I don't know what the fuck my problem was. So I had to re-record this section, and it sounds noticeably different because I'm a dumbass. This surface gravity is a bit over 1/3 of Earth's, being 3.7 meters per second squared versus Earth's 9.8 meters per second squared, which shakes out to roughly 38% of Earth's gravity. Mercury is very similar in size to a few other objects in the solar system, such as Ganymede, which is the largest moon of Jupiter, and Titan, which is the largest moon of Saturn. Despite the similar size, however, it's much more dense, meaning Mercury's surface gravity is much higher as the planet has much more mass. I do want to mention as well, someone left a comment about how it's weird that everything has the same gravity in science fiction, and I actually totally agree with that. I do agree that it's weird, but I feel like it's probably like difficult to implement in like a video game because it would cause problems from a gameplay perspective. Because like if Mars actually had its gravity that's like, I think it's roughly like 40-ish% of Earth's, something like that, somewhere in that area, I think it would be really cool to have that. But if you think about it from a gameplay standpoint, having low gravity on Mars or high gravity on Jupiter would be fucking awful. Like, I wish science fiction addressed the gravity thing more. The only franchise I can think of that ever did that was Mass Effect, actually. But I feel like it's something that's got, like, potential and it should be explored more. But in a game like Warframe, it would probably just be really fucking annoying. So, just a bit of a side tangent based on that comment. Because I totally agree with them. I wish that science fiction addressed the gravity thing more. Like, for reference, if we colonize Mars one day, people born on Mars cannot come back to Earth. The gravity would crush their bones. It would just be too much on them. If you're in space, like an astronaut on the ISS, you have to go through physical therapy when you come back because the low gravity weakens your skeleton and stuff like that, weakens your muscles, and it reduces your bone density, I guess is the word I'm looking for, if memory serves. So, like, if you were born on Mars, you couldn't come back to Earth. Realistically, you could not come back to Earth without, like, some kind of, like, mechanical assistance because you just physically be weaker. Whereas, like, if we had people that lived on, like, a cloud city on Jupiter, they'd probably be hugely muscular if they could survive, because Jupiter's gravity is so much stronger. So, just something that I, find interesting. That's just this entire video. I don't know what the fuck I'm going on about. We'll just keep it rolling. More mass. So, I mentioned earlier that Mercury has no atmosphere, but it does have something that's still very interesting, an exosphere. This is a thin and unstable layer of particles that is so loose that said particles don't even interact with each other. What do I mean by unstable? Well, the particles that make up the I'm going to be honest, I included this image because I did not know what else to do here, and I worry that with it being mostly white, it probably blinded some people when they were watching this late at night, myself included, so I'm sorry if that happened to you. This is my formal apology. I do think it's really interesting to look at, and you don't really need to know the scientific jargon of it much, just the general shape of the ion density, like graph here, should be enough to give you an idea of what you're looking at. Atmosphere are constantly lost and replenished from various sources. Particles are carried away by solar wind or otherwise escape into space, while various processes renew those lost particles. The exosphere contains a lot of chemicals, like hydrogen, helium, oxygen, so I think this is also really cool. Like I mentioned this in a little bit, but the presence of these types of elements, sodium, calcium, like these are metals, and then, silicon is here, and it's like, that's really weird. Oh, come on, resolve. Potassium, magnesium, and silicon. The presence of hydrogen and helium aren't super surprising, as those are likely deposited by the solar wind that blasts the planet, considering that the main things the sun is made of are hydrogen and helium. The other elements are interesting, though, and we're not entirely... I love this image. Like, it's very difficult to, discern from a scientific perspective, but showing, the emissions of these elements is really cool. I'm just going to keep adjusting the playhead because I think it lags less if I do that. We're not entirely sure how they get there, especially considering that many of them are metals. Radioactive decay from volatile compounds on the surface of the planet is likely a contributing factor, as well as the sublimation that formed the aforementioned hollows regions likely also creating material for the exosphere. Another thing for that with the exosphere, because comet impacts is another thing that was, like I mentioned, with the water deposition. But another one I had seen was that, when reading more theories about it while working on the video, I had already recorded this when I had found this out. But another theory for it is when asteroids and, well, I guess they become meteors, and then they hit, and they when they impact, they become meteorites. But when a meteorite strikes the surface, it vaporizes everything it hits. So, within a certain amount, I suppose I should clarify. It doesn't vaporize the whole fucking planet, right? So that vaporization also probably contributes some of these materials to the exosphere. But I thought that was interesting because Mercury doesn't get hit by meteorites super often, right? The craters we see all over it are from tens of millions of years. I think that we do know of some incidents that have been recorded of impacts on Mercury. Nothing on the same level as was a Shoemaker Levy or whatever that Jupiter had, but we have observed, if memory serves, that kind of thing happening at least once. But it's not super common. So I was like, if the particles in the exosphere are constantly being stripped away, that can't be a major source, I would imagine. But especially with I mentioned this with the tail, but primarily sodium emissions change a lot in Mercury's year. So this, where that sodium is coming from has to be somewhere else, I would imagine, considering the fact that, the emission amount changes so much and it's clearly losing a lot of it. The exosphere also contains water vapor, which was a big surprise. That was a noise. Surprise for scientists, likely coming from the polar water ice I mentioned earlier. The amount of material emitted from the exosphere changes at different points throughout Mercury's year, but during its high points, Mercury has a visible tail in the... This is really cool. This kind of stuff makes me really wish that I lived somewhere that wasn't full of light pollution. For those who don't know, light pollution is if you have a lot of sources of light on the ground, it essentially overpowers the light in space. It's kind of a similar concept with the moon image I mentioned, or that I showed earlier. So because of that fact, light pollution is a bitch, and I hate it, and because I live inside city limits, I can't see anything in the night sky. I would love to see stuff like this, but I can see the moon at best, and that sucks. And anyone here who also lives within city limits, you can probably relate. And people who live out in the country, I envy you, but only on those grounds, because you're far away from everything else, and that's probably annoying. It has a visible tail in the night sky from Earth, which is really cool. So, that's all I wanted to cover about Mercury when it comes to real-life science. Note that this section is not at all comprehensive, and there is a lot of fascinating stuff to learn about this planet, but that's... A lot of this fascinating stuff was stuff I had planned to talk about in this video, actually, which is why this recording is almost an hour long already, and we're 10 minutes through a 20-minute video. But that's all that will be relevant to our discussion. I will leave resources in the description if you want to learn more, which I do highly recommend. To serve as our transition between fact and fiction, I want to talk about the various star chart mission nodes on Mercury and where they get their names. I actually thought about making this its own series, explaining star chart nodes, but I thought it'd be something that would be fun to work into this one, which is why it's included instead in here. A lot of these are rooted in Latin, so be warned, my pronunciations aren't going to be great.
The most important node to explain is Caloris, which is named after a region called the Caloris Planitia, notable
Now,
because
this has kind of already been a thing because of Space Engine, but I want to just point out, I think it is genuinely insane that these images exist. All of these images, right here, Pantheon, Boethius. The fact that we have images like this blows my mind, not just for Mercury, but for everywhere. Like the images from Curiosity on Mars, from Venera, from Juno. These are like the distance between us and these objects is insane to the point where we have no intuitive grasp of it. And yet we have photos from other fucking planets. I think that like it just goes to show how crazy science is in the modern era, and not even just modern era. Like I said, Mariner was in the 70s, like even Cold War era because of the space race and stuff. The fact that we have stuff like this is fucking insane. These are pictures of another planet, millions, tens of millions of kilometers away, and yet we sent a probe out there and it was able to take these photos and send them back to us. I just think that's fucking nuts. Like I said, same with Venera, Curiosity, Juno, Cassini, Voyager, all of those probes we've sent. New Horizons. The fact that we have these images blows my fucking mind. And I feel like it's one of those things that's kind of taken for granted on some level. Like the fact that we know about these things is insane.
of a whopping 1,550 kilometers and is surrounded by a region of mountains called the Caloris Montes, which sit at around 2 kilometers tall. The name of the region comes from the Latin calor, meaning heat, which, aside from the obvious, comes from the fact that the sun is directly over the region for the entirety of the planet's time at perihelion. The crater at the center of the basin also contains plains of lava, which is rad as hell. The reason it's so important to explain this node's name first is because several other nodes are named after geological features that are also within this region.
There is a lot of stuff within the Caloris Planitia. Or, okay, I want to make a comment about this real quick. I think it might actually be pronounced Planitia, but I wasn't able to find a consistent pronunciation because, like, minor problem. People don't really speak Latin anymore outside of a scientific context because they all fucking died. So finding accurate pronunciations for things, especially in that language, is kind of difficult. So I said Planitia because it was more, I'm speaking English, right? So it was easier to say it that way, and people would read it and know what, how it was. They could get it. Let me put it that way. They would get it. But I think it might be pronounced more like Planitia, but I feel like saying it like that was just, I didn't know for sure. So I'm like, I'm going to just take the safe bet on this. I'm going to hope that that's good enough. And I'm going to hope people don't watch this video to the extent that no one who knows will call me out for it. We'll find out, remains to be seen, I guess.
Speaking of, our next node is Pantheon, which is named after Pantheon Fossae, a region of radial troughs that lie within the Caloris Basin. The crater at the center of the region is named Apollodorus, which just so happens to be the name of another mission.
This is a very subtle thing. All of the footage for me on the star chart here, I recorded this while listening to this audio, so I'd move my cursor where it needed to go. You can't really tell very easily, but I do move my cursor from Pantheon to Apollodorus in the background, which can then be seen when the blur goes away.
The surrounding region, instead seemingly being there out of pure coincidence. On the topic of craters, there are 2 more nodes named after craters on Mercury, Boethius and Tolstoy.
I also just want to mention, part of why I had to re-record this was because of Tolstoy being pronounced Tolstoy. I wasn't sure, so I recorded lines with it being as Tolstoy and Tolstage, like how it's spelled. And then once I realized that Tolstoy was correct, I wanted to redo it just to kind of nail it down.
Boethius is named after Roman politician and philosopher Anicius Manlius Severinus Boethius. Fucking hell.
That took me like a dozen tries.
Who existed in the early Middle Ages and made several important contributions to history, such as being one of the main people who translated Greek literature into Latin and also being a leading Christian scholar in his era. Tolstoy is named after Leo Tolstoy, a Russian author best.
So I want to talk about a couple things here, actually. First of all, using images like this was a little bit scary, and still is, because while I did my best to cite my sources, and almost everything here is from Wikimedia Commons and from people who have been like dead for over 100 years, it's still kind of dicey for me to include images like this. It just kind of stresses me out a bit. Also, the false color composite of Tolstoy here, it's a little bit hard to... It's not like a great visual, honestly, but we don't have that many photos of Tolstoy. But this is something that I want to explain more in future episodes, the concept of false color, where scientists do stuff like this. Often it's to try and highlight certain features, like depth or, I think, like magnitude, stuff like that. So a lot of false color images of Mercury look like this, and the reason for that is because they're trying to highlight specific features of it. So I didn't really explain that in the video because it wasn't really relevant. I just included the tag false color composite, but I just kind of wanted to bring that up now. This is going to come up a few other times in the series. I'm pretty sure in like one of the most famous pictures of Venus is a false color that was used to penetrate its atmosphere. So it looks way different if you were to actually see it with your own eyes than that image, but that image is the most well-known image of Venus.
They're best known for his book War and Peace, though he's made several other influential works and is regarded as one of the most important authors of all time. The Tolstoy crater itself also seems to have formed fairly early in Mercury's history, with the basin surrounding the crater being ancient. While not exactly a crater, the node Suisei is named after the Suisei planitia, which is a large and
I don't know if I pronounced this word correctly. I re-recorded this segment just in case, and I still don't know if I pronounced Suisei correctly.
relatively smooth plains region thought to have been created by material ejected from the Caloris impact. Suisei is also the Japanese word for Mercury, so that's also a likely origin for the node's name and my struggle to pronounce it. Moving on from the geological features, there are also many nodes on Mercury that take their names from mythology. The most obvious is Odin, which has a very interesting story.
I just want to say that, yeah, this is another example of the taking an image where I'm like, I don't love using things that I didn't make, but George von Rosen has been dead for 150 years now, so I don't think he's gonna mind too much personally. I just still feel weird about it.
You see, the Romans associated the Norse god Odin with Mercury, which was done for an interesting political reason. When you're an empire like Rome and you go around conquering regions, it's pretty expedient to try and tell other cultures that their gods are actually your gods to make your own religion seem more legitimate. As such, Odin was associated with Mercury much like how Hermes was, as they shared some superficial traits such as associations with magic and knowledge, trickery and disguise, and traveling between realms.
Something interesting about this is that a lot of people, I read a really interesting Reddit thread about the subject of Odin's association with Mercury, because it was really, like, tenuous. Mercury and Odin were not that much alike, and yet they associated the two because of very superficial things. And that was a pretty frequent practice from what I had read about with the Romans and with the Norse gods especially, was a lot of their associations were pretty weak because it was based on a lot of very superficial comparisons, I'll put it that way. So, like, Odin being associated with Mercury was kind of weird, and if you know Norse myth, you would have probably clocked that's kind of weird, but the Romans didn't put that much thought into it, it didn't seem like. Like, they definitely had things that connected them, like the stuff I mentioned in the video, but it seems like overall, it wasn't a great connection to make, at least from what I had read in that thread, and, people who are a bigger expert in the subject were talking about.
Realms. Next up is Terminus, which is named after the Roman god of landmarkers, which is another thing that the god Mercury is also connected to.
Apparently, Terminus was regularly depicted like this. Sorry, I'm speaking so fast I'm getting ahead of myself. So he was really often depicted as a landmarker like this. And so this was, yeah, from this book. But I thought that was really bizarre that, like, this is how they would depict one of their gods.
Terminus is closely associated with land ownership, even having his own festival called Terminalia, which was celebrated by landowners every February 23rd.
You guys gonna join me for celebrating Terminalia next year, February 23rd? Don't be late. Don't be late. We're gonna celebrate Terminalia next year.
Yes, the Romans had a landlord deity. The node Lares is named after, well, the Lares, which
This is tricky because I actually don't know if Luis Garcia is the person who made the sculpture or took the picture. The image attribution didn't really make it clear.
were sort of local guardian deities who were said to watch over the things and events that took place within their domain.
That's also a pretty big simplification. Apparently, Larry's were like, not only that, but I think there was like some connection to one's own ancestry that was involved in that. And they would like have, little shrines to them in their homes and they would pray to them and things like that, if memory serves. So there was more to the Larrys than that. I didn't get super into it. Some people actually said that they thought that this segment was too long already. And for me, it's about as short as I thought I could make it.
The last mythological node is actually Larunda Relay, as Larunda in Roman mythology was a water spirit who fell in love with Mercury. Her tongue was eventually cut out by Jupiter, king of the gods, after she revealed to his wife Juno that he had an affair with Juturna, the wife of the god Janus. Her story also says that she birthed the first of the Lares, though the details of that are, unpleasant.
Okay, I was waiting for this video to talk about that. I did not want to bring it up in the actual video. So, two things. First of all, the mother of the Lares in Roman mythology is like 3 different goddesses, or I guess entities. Larunda is one of them, but there are a couple others. And so different stories attribute them, different origins. The origin involving Larunda is pretty bad. I'm gonna preface this now. What you're about to hear is not very pleasant. So, with the story of Larunda, she finds out about the affair that Jupiter had with Uterna. Against, I think it's her parents' advice, she tells Juno anyways. This pisses Jupiter off, and he cuts her tongue out. And then because Mercury is the one who escorts souls to the underworld, Jupiter had Mercury bring his own lover to hell, essentially. And remember, her tongue's been cut out, so she can't say anything. And so Mercury is like, well, she can't say no. I'll put it that way. And so the Larrys were born because in the story, Mercury rapes her before sending her to hell. And it's like, who the fuck made this, dude? Mythology is incredibly, sexually perverted in general, but reading that and like literally Larunda couldn't say anything. She couldn't fight back against Mercury and she was literally being dragged to hell by him. I'm just like, what the fuck, dude? Like, I wasn't comfortable including that in the video. Even beyond the, like, monetization concerns, I was just like, I don't want to talk about this.
While not exactly mythological, the node Elion is a Hebrew name, which is associated with the Greek name Helios, meaning sun. In Hebrew, the name Elion also means things like supreme, highest, or uppermost, which seems to further describe Mercury's proximity to the sun.
Funny thing, because Elion is a Hebrew name, I actually asked my friend Idan, who's from Israel, how to pronounce it, and then I realized I did it wrong when he told me that I did it wrong, and I re-recorded this segment for that reason. I originally pronounced it Elion, so the emphasis was more on like the E, Elion, but he pointed out it was more pronounced Elion, because when I was looking up pronunciations for it, both pronunciations came up frequently, both Elion and Elion, and so I wasn't sure which one was right. So I said Elion because that was sort of what the spelling would have implied. But after Idan pointed that out to me, I decided to go with his pronunciation because he actually lives there. I actually had a joke line in here as well where I made so something Idan pointed out to me in our talk was that Elion also means top, like top shelf in some contexts, which also kind of furthers the whole proximity to the sun argument. And I had originally written in the joke that it's obvious to me that that's why Idan isn't named Elion because he's not a top. But I was like, this joke is kind of out of place, so that got cut.
Our final node is M prime, which I don't really have any clear explanation for. My guess is that it stands for Mercury prime, and it's named such as it's one of the first nodes we can play on, meaning that it's likely a very valuable region as it connects closely with the solar rail that links us to Mercury.
This is going to come up a few more times in the series with like E prime and or I think, yeah, V prime. And then there's also E gate on Venus. So this isn't the first time this kind of weird naming convention is going to come up, but I'm guessing it was to show new players like these nodes link you across planets.
Okay, now that all the nodes have been explained, I have one more node-related thing I want to bring up. You might notice that many of these nodes are very far apart, despite several being close to each other geographically in real life, like Pantheon and Apollodorus.
I love the red arrow. That's the only comment I have about this. I love the red arrow.
For example. Some of the nodes even appear to take place on the surface of the planet itself, though this is not the case, as can be seen with several.
I think, Ellie, you actually asked me what I was supposed to be showing here, and I realized this is not a great angle for this. So this is taking place on one of the nodes that's on the surface. I think it actually was Elion, but you can look out into space. This is a hangar tile. So there are, if I look to the right, there are like furbolgs and stuff that have mining machines hooked up to them. The point I was trying to make was we're clearly not actually on the surface of Mercury because you can see Mercury in the skybox. I didn't record that though. I didn't even think about it. I thought that this would be sufficient. If I actually showed that you could see Mercury, it would have made 10 times more sense. I don't know why I didn't do that. So just to clarify that point, you can see Mercury if you look out. Because like if I just said, oh, you can just, see space. Well, yeah, no shit, you're on Mercury. There's no atmosphere. What the fuck else are you supposed to see, right? So it's just like, oh, I probably should have filmed that better.
Tiles that look out into space. I point this out to clarify two things. The names of the nodes are not accurate descriptions of where they take place geographically, and where the node is physically on the star chart does not mean the node actually takes place there. This will be important throughout the entire series, but I wanted to point it out now. So, getting into the representation of Mercury within Warframe, I want to start with the lore we get from its codex fragment, which reads, Galleon fleets keep watch over the Grineer mining operations that penetrate Mercury's asteroid field. Cavernous rooms and twisting metal corridors mark where laborers have stripped the region for crucial resources, transforming the natural landscape to support Grineer occupancy. That's all well and good, but you might have noticed that all of my talk about Mercury earlier never mentioned an asteroid field. I even specifically mentioned that Mercury has no natural satellites, so where does this asteroid field come from?
Um, so something about this. Weirdly enough, Warframe isn't the only game with this weird asteroids around Mercury thing. Like, I was thinking I was going fucking nuts researching this, because I was like, more than one thing has done this, because this is gonna sound crazy. Tapato, if you're watching this, I want to apologize in advance. Probably about to offend you. I really like Call of Duty Infinite Warfare. Specifically, its campaign does a lot of cool stuff with exploring the solar system. The node for Mercury in that campaign does the same shit, though. It doesn't take place anywhere near Mercury. There's like just some random fucking asteroid in the region that it happens on. And I don't know why. Seems like the fact that it's happened twice throws me for a loop. I don't know what's up with that.
Well, while it's never explicitly stated, I do actually have a theory about it. This is not supported by a ton of direct evidence, but I think it makes sense, so let me explain. So, I mentioned earlier that Mercury is both very dense and made of a lot of metal, which means the planet would be very valuable to mine for minerals that can be turned into things like weapon and ship components. Issue is, Mercury is also incredibly hot or incredibly cold depending on which side you're on, meaning that establishing habitation on the planet itself is very difficult. As such, my theory is that the Grineer are using some kind of high-yield explosive to blow chunks of Mercury out into space, which can then be mined much more safely and manageably than if they were on the surface of the planet itself.
I wanted to let that play out to talk about it because that theory is a little bit contentious. Some people have put forward interesting theories of their own. Someone said that maybe the Orokin brought asteroids to Mercury so they could use solar power to mine them more efficiently. Stuff like that. So there's a lot of different things for how this could have happened, but something that someone pointed out, because someone had mentioned them using explosives is probably really resource inefficient, but they could be using kinetic penetrators. So basically, if you played Call of Duty Ghost, you might know what I'm talking about with Odin in that game. But if you take a tungsten rod and you drop it from space, it would go so fast that it would basically be like dropping a nuclear bomb. So it's definitely possible as well that maybe the Grineer were breaking apart Mercury by shooting these metal rods into it, which would probably be way easier than a bomb. But just something I thought I'd mention. Also, I'm gonna backtrack a bit. This section, or no, this is actually a little bit ahead. This section here, where I said that the codex entries lie sometimes, someone seemed to get really offended by that in the comment section, and they're like, "Are you ever gonna show proof for this?" I'm guessing no, and I just want to say, saying wording your comment like that makes you a pretentious dick. Please don't do that. If you're going to accuse me of leaving out context or not elaborating on an argument, and then you're going to just presuppose I'm never going to do it, that's stupid. So I replied to the comment because I'll elaborate on my argument. So the reason that the codex fragments lie is because of Uranus. Uranus's codex fragment says that the surface of Uranus is an ocean. This is not true, and we know it's not true because in the skybox for Uranus, prior to Jade Shadows changes it and clouds cover this up. Prior to Jade Shadows, you can see the outline of Uranus in the skybox, which means you're on a moon. That's the only way that logically makes sense. So the codex fragment is just straight up wrong. And beyond that, if it was right, that would be fucking stupid. There's no ocean on Uranus, not a water one. Sure, there's an ocean of methane and stuff on there, but it's not there's not gonna be fish in it, you know what I mean? So if it's a moon of Uranus, like Oberon or Titania or something like that, that's totally fine, and it makes more sense that way. But the codex fragment says oceanic surface of Uranus, which is just complete bullshit. I didn't really elaborate that much on this video because I didn't think it was necessary, but that person seemed to take that very personally, so I wanted to just kind of address it now.
When viewing Mercury in the star chart, you can even see constant flashes of orange and red, which may represent explosions from these bombardments tearing up the planet's surface, or maybe even loose material crashing back down from the asteroid field above. This theory does have its issues, absolutely, with one of the big ones being that the codex entry uses the term natural landscape when describing the asteroid field.
Someone pointed out that whether or not that was specifically in regards to the asteroid field is kind of debatable. I think it comes down to your own personal interpretation of the text. I feel like the way it's worded means that the asteroid field is part of the natural landscape, but I think you could reasonably interpret that that's not necessarily what it was saying.
Thing is, the codex entries do sometimes outright lie, which will become a bigger problem later in the series, but also means it's possible this descriptor isn't accurate when it comes to Mercury. This could also mean that the asteroid belt around Mercury formed through some other process, such as a massive meteorite impact, but there's just as little evidence for that as there is my own theory. I think it's a neat idea that makes some sense, even if there isn't a ton of direct evidence, so I wanted to include it.
Gray Archon actually told me in a stream that I did recently that he also thought that this was a plausible theory, and Gray Archon runs the Oregon Archive, so I see him as a bit of an authority on these topics because he's been hosting that website for a while. If you're watching this also, hello Gray Archon. So I think that, like, because like, so there's a lot of different theories about it, but I thought that made sense when I thought of it, and I'm glad that at least one other person thinks that it makes sense.
Alright, so aside from my crackpot theory, let's take a look at Mercury itself through its orbital skybox in the orbiter. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the planet is brown, which is also the case.
I put this here partially in relation to the messenger image. If I go to my assets, this guy, the artist interpretation. You see how Mercury is kind of brown? Some false colors, or like true color interpretations do make Mercury look brown, but not to this extent. And even beyond that, like if you look, it's not quite that, it's similar, but not quite the same. But Mercury is generally accepted to be gray, as I understand it, sorry. We do have like different interpretations because cameras aren't like 100% reliable on these things, but generally it's accepted to be mostly gray.
The planet is brown, which is also the case in the star chart, and is just not the color of the planet. The sun is also pretty dim and weirdly translucent for some reason, which is not really what you would expect from the planet that's closest to our host star.
This is going to come up a lot, but this bothers me. The sun is there. You can see it if I zoom in. That is the sun. First of all, what the fuck? Why does it look like that? It's translucent. You can literally see, if you look close enough, other stars through the sun. That doesn't make any fucking sense. Also, the angle of the lighting doesn't make any sense. The sun is over here, but the light source here would imply that it would be more like over here. I feel like this isn't a huge issue on this in particular, but the sun is so close to being eclipsed by Mercury that it shouldn't be this lit up. And like, for some, like Earth in particular, Earth's skybox is so fucking bad about this. The sun is on the wrong side entirely. It's so weird.
Mercury can also be seen rotating very quickly.
Wait, hold on. Did I move the footage on accident?
In this skybox, which shouldn't be the case. Evidence, so I wanted to include it. Alright, so aside from my
I did accidentally move the footage. Whoops.
crackpot theory,
Let's
take a look at Mercury itself through its orbital skybox in the orbiter. The first thing you'll probably notice is that the planet is brown, which is also the case in the star chart, and is just not the color of the planet. The sun is also pretty dim and weirdly translucent for some reason, which is not really what you would expect from the planet that's closest to our host star. Mercury can also be seen rotating very quickly in this skybox, which shouldn't be the case considering its real-life sidereal.
You can see if I drag this was another thing I added on. I felt like it was worth pointing out. It was kind of weird.
Day length of almost 59 Earth days. Most glaring, though, if you ask me at least, is that the aforementioned Mercurian asteroid field is entirely absent. On the bright side, we do have two whole galleons. This skybox really shows its age, but fortunately, we do have a more up-to-date one that appears during the third act of.
Someone made the comment I should have shut my HUD off in this part, and I actually totally agree, but I was genuinely, my brain was so numb from replaying this quest that I just completely forgot to.
Of the new War Quest. The sun seems to be too close to Mercury in this instance, but I think that it both conveys its proximity to the star better and is also just really cool visually, so I'm letting it slide on the grounds of rule of cool. I'm gonna be honest, things being too close to each other is going to be the #1 recurring issue in this series, so you're gonna have to get used to it.
So something I want to mention is that I think it was Idan left a comment about how, like, why the game does this with like things being too close, because space is just so unimaginably vast that like in real life it's a lot more boring than this. Things are not this close to each other. Space is full of a lot of space. And I want to clarify in this, I do understand that, right? And I get that like science fiction does this all the time, not just Warframe. I mean, Destiny, Helldivers, like a lot of games that take, you know, have space as like a major element of their story and their like world, you know, the setting, do this because it looks cooler and it conveys the idea better. And I think that's not a problem necessarily. I guess I say that it's, the number one problem in this series, but like I should probably have clarified it's the number one inaccuracy. It looks cool, and I'm completely willing to let it slide for that reason, but I think it's important to point out when it happens for people who are less educated on the topic. Because, like, this is not a realistic distance between Mercury and the Sun, and I know that, and people who know about this subject know that, but if you aren't into this stuff, you might think, wow, that's 70 million kilometers from the sun? And the answer is, fuck no, it isn't. This is way too close. And so even though I think it's like there's a totally justifiable reason for why it looks like this, it's important to point out for people who aren't as knowledgeable.
The planet is also actually the right color, being much closer to its natural gray. Most notably, though, is the existence of the asteroid field around the planet, which helps to visually represent what the codex fragment told us. You can also see what looks like the sun's solar wind interacting with the exosphere and stripping away particles, which is a really neat touch.
I don't really know if that was what they were actually going for, but that's what it looks like, so that's what I'm going with.
I really hope that at some point the normal orbiter skybox gets replaced with this one, or at least some variation of it, because it's both absolutely gorgeous and also does a much better job of conveying what the game's lore.
The cursed, oh my god, hold on, I just have to point this out. This thing, the inner might orb, this fucking rat bastard has ruined so much of my footage. For those who don't know, if you're using Xeneric, when inner might is charged, this little orb will start to orbit you. Oh, it's so fucking annoying. Like, in a mission, it's fine. It's actually helpful. When I'm trying to record something, oh my fucking god, I hate that thing.
This one, or at least some variation of it, because it's both absolutely gorgeous and also does a much better job of conveying what the game's lore is trying to get at.
I really hope, especially with the tile set being up for relight soon, that they'll do a new skybox. Mercury and Jupiter are like the two that really need new ones, in my opinion. Europa too, actually. Europa's skybox is also really outdated, but Mercury's just looks bad, and I hope that they do something when they relight the tile set.
So, now that we've established a few reasons why that asteroid field might be present, and what it looks like, let's talk about its contents. Mercury is made up of two tile sets, the Grineer Galleon and the Grineer Asteroid Base. Galleons are the Grineer's primary warships, and
I will say, I kind of wish I did more in this section. Like, the tile set exploration was pretty short, but I feel like, well, first of all, there was some things that I discovered while working on the video that I kind of wanted to include, but it felt too last minute to work them in, because I had already recorded it and was, like, making this part when I had found them. But I think I want to do more in-depth stuff with this in the Saturn video for one particular reason. Railjack. I can see the outsides of these structures, and there are unique rooms in Railjack exclusively. So I kind of want to talk about them more in depth in that video, because I think that there's, more stuff you can see there in terms of how, like, the bigger picture stuff, I guess. But even so, I think I kind of dropped the ball on this a bit, I'm not gonna lie.
and, as mentioned by the Codex fragment, are present to protect the mining operations present within the asteroids. These galleons pack massive arsenals and troop complements, and serve as both habitation and projections of Grineer power in orbit around the worlds that they control. The asteroid-based tile set takes place within the asteroids themselves.
Someone left a comment that I probably shouldn't have done Mercury first because the asteroid base is up for a relight, but I actually decided that that was going to be a reason to do it, because I kind of wanted this to be like an archive almost. This tile set has looked like this for so long, and I wanted to cover it now because, A, my brain liked it more when it comes to, the idea of doing the planets in order from closest to furthest from the sun. So I'm doing it that way because my brain likes that better. But also, I kind of wanted this like a sort of a visual archive of like, this is what this used to look like.
Showing how the Grineer are stripping them of resources from the inside. These asteroids have been converted so that Grineer workers and soldiers can remain inside as the material is mined.
There's something I want to point out in this. There's a shower here. You can't really see it, but do you see that through the cloth? There is blood in this shower, which I think is a really interesting piece of environmental storytelling. And there's a lot of stuff like this in all of Warframe's tile sets, really. Like, did someone die? Did, like, a worker, like, suffer a grievous injury? Did they get sick and, like, vomit it up? We don't know. It's just kind of there, and you make what you make of it.
With bunks and ventilation systems carved throughout the rock. With how slapdash everything looks, it's clear this arrangement is far from permanent, likely only lasting until the inhabited asteroid is picked clean.
There is actually a room in the asteroid base I kind of wanted to include, but I didn't because I felt like it was going to totally ruin the tone and the like immersion of the scene. So there is a spawn tile for the asteroid base. You get it in survival a lot. The room where you spawn in and there's the locked door in the console in the middle. If you're in that room and you look behind you, there is like sort of a series of iron bars elevated up off the ground. If you jump up and look over those iron bars, there are 3 boxes behind them, and the floor is completely missing. There's just no floor in that area, and it's so jarring that such a blatant mistake has existed in the game for so long. And so I thought about including that, but I was like, the whole vibe of this part is to kind of like draw the viewer into the world of Warframe, and I was like, I don't want to do that. I saved my joke for a little later, and with the the miners segment.
Many mining machines can be found throughout the tile set, which are used to chew through the rock in search of both additional resources and new room to establish habitation. Lava rivers can also be seen throughout the tile set, which may be waste rock that has been melted down to be discarded, minerals being refined or transported, or maybe even features of the asteroids themselves stemming from their violent ejection from Mercury.
I really don't know what to make of the lava, honestly. It's in a lot of spots of the tile set, but its purpose is still kind of a mystery to me, which I think is cool. There's a lot you can, posit with what's going on there.
Large series of pipes and conveyors can be seen throughout the tile set as well, moving the large quantities of mined material for both refining and...
Okay, minor thing. I don't know if anyone has noticed this. There is a capture target in this footage, right here. I did not realize when I was filming this because my HUD was off. This guy was over here tweaking out in the corner of this recording, and I just hoped that nobody would see him because he was so small, and I kept trying to get this room and failing, even though it's normally really common.
quantities of mined material for both refining and shipment. Now, one comment I want to make about this tile set is that I really think it should have some unique enemies. The Grineer here are just like their Galleon counterparts, but the purpose of an asteroid base is entirely different from a Galleon.
Something that people brought up was the Drudge on Ceres, and I do know about them, and I really don't know why I didn't bring them up in this video. Like, I think that was really stupid in hindsight, because the Drudge would be an interesting opportunity to make, like, new Drudge variants for mining specifically, but the Drudge on Ceres are not miners, they are ship scrappers. That's what they do, they break down Grineer ships. So I feel like copy and pasting them would not be a good move. They should definitely be different, because they are here for a different reason. But I definitely should have brought the Drudge up. I will in the Ceres video, obviously, but I really should have in this one.
I think it would be really cool if we had a Grineer subfaction of miners. Like the kind that mine rocks and minerals. As I was saying.
I don't know if my vocal delivery for this joke worked, I'm gonna be honest. I feel like it sounds a little robotic.
Like the kind that mine rocks and minerals. As I...
Yeah, I feel like if I just said the kind that mine rocks and cut the minerals part, it might have sounded better, but I don't know, the joke didn't release that way.
I was saying. It would be cool to combat Grineer that are equipped with mining tools and equipment.
So part of this that I wish I would have talked about more, these furbolgs aren't for transporting troops. They're for transporting mining machines, which I think is really cool. Because it's like, are they bringing them to other parts of the asteroid, or are they taking them to get repaired somewhere else? Like, what specifically they're doing that for is kind of a mystery, but you can tell that's what they're retrofitted for, which is interesting.
Alongside their complement of marines that are there to protect them. We could even have cool idle animations of them mining or working like the Juno Corpus have, as well as unique armor to show how they're adapted to the conditions of working on the asteroid base. This is ultimately a pretty minor point, but as this tile set is up for a relight soon, I think it would go a long way in improving the immersion if DE took the extra step and gave this area its own subfaction too.
This area is kind of like a major ventilation hub, it looks like, with like all the fans and the piping and stuff. So I wanted to include this footage because I wanted it earlier when I mentioned the like ventilation rooms, but I felt like it just didn't really fit to like transition that quickly. So I was just like, you know what? Put it here, and we're just going to leave it at that.
The last important thing I want to mention is the presence of the Infested, which are released by Dr. Tengus during the quest Once Awake and become a major presence in the region afterward.
I don't love a lot of this footage, but it was admittedly a little bit rushed.
They can be encountered on several nodes throughout the player's journey through Mercury, though I think it's interesting to question whether or not they can survive in the region permanently. The Infested are very weak to heat, and the intense solar energy in the Mercury region would probably bake them if they were outside an asteroid base or Galleon. As such, it's entirely possible that they may not be able to survive without occupying the Grineer's existing structures, which would also severely limit their spread. Nothing in-game really addresses this question, I just think it's a fun idea to put forward.
Okay, so on the Infested, I have a couple things to mention that were pointed out in the comments. One was that the mining operation here is actually really great sort of like indirect storytelling for how the infestation is spreading. Because the Grineer are mining materials from these asteroids where they got loose, right? So it's totally possible that the material they're mining and shipping around contains infested spores, and that's how they're getting around as well. But like I mentioned earlier, I had an idea for talking about like a potential new tile set for Mercury. And my original idea, I just really couldn't bring it together. Like the original thought process was to have facilities on the surface of Mercury that harnessed the heat of the sun to melt down material that was mined. So like you would have the base itself was like underground, but then there would be like big apparatuses above ground that would focus the solar energy so that they could melt material. And so it's really hot and you'd have to avoid like heat hazards and stuff. And then there would be like a nighttime side of the planet where the infested would be primarily dominant because it's not very hot anymore and you'd have cold related hazards. But I feel like I couldn't really get it to work, right? So I was just like, I'm just going to shelve that idea, not bring it up in the video. Someone commented a really great idea though for the infested being on the surface, but more specifically because of the rotation, a really clever way to kind of work its real life attributes into the game, where the rotation and the changing of the day and the night cycle would make it so that the infested were basically they would stay on the dark side of the planet and were trying to evolve to make it onto the light side. And if they did that, we would have a heat resistant infestation strain, which would be super dangerous. So the idea they put forward was that there would be like a big incentive for us to try and stop or cull that infestation, because if they evolve to that point, they would be a massive threat. I think that's a super awesome idea. That would be a really cool expansion or something like that, to have like this super infested strain that's thriving on the cold side and trying to creep their way to the warm side so that they can overcome their greatest weakness.
So, that's Warframe's approach to Mercury, a somewhat scientifically tenuous, but still compelling fictitious twist on the first of the solar system's planets. This might be surprising, but Mercury actually doesn't have that much to talk about compared to many of the other objects in this series, so
That's fucked up for two reasons. One, this video's 20 minutes, and I genuinely expect Venus to be like twice as long. And two, this commentary's been almost an hour and a half. This might actually be the longest one I've ever done, and it's for the shortest video in the commentary series by far.
while I had a ton of fun diving into what this location has to offer, we're barely scratching the surface of what this series is going to cover. Mercury is an old location that remains relatively unchanged after all these years, but newer locations with more recent lore and visuals do some incredibly cool stuff that I'm very excited to talk about. I also want to give another big shout out to
Funny story. You know how I mentioned way back at the start of this that space engine footage using the in-game path editor would cause the render to fail? I forgot to replace this really tiny piece of footage at the very end. It lasts for what? 5 seconds. 4 seconds, I think, actually. Yeah, about 4 seconds. This footage, I was so done. It was like 6 or 7 in the morning. I'm just trying to render this shit, upload it, and go the fuck to sleep. And my render fucking fails because I forgot to replace this with the fixed version, and I was so fucking mad.
I also want to give another big shout out to Space Engine. It's a really awesome tool that I recommend you check out if you like this kind of stuff. If you would, let me know what you thought of this video in the comments. I am very interested in the feedback that I will receive, as this is so different from the other stuff I posted on my channel. Do also let me know what other theories or insights you might have, as this topic is brimming with potential for speculation, and I think it's super fun to talk about.
In regards to that, something I actually want to talk about, I'm also just going to fix something real quick. I just realized I'm pretty sure that in Space Engine's EULA, if you use them to make a video, you're supposed to link their website in the description. I just realized I forgot to do that, so I'm going to go ahead and just add that as we're talking. But we'll just slot it in here. This video was made in part with Space Engine, and then I'll just slap the website. Okay. So, what was I going to talk about? Yeah, tell me what you think. This is the first time in ages I've actually read all the comments on a video, because this isn't like Warframe politics stuff. So, like, oftentimes, I've mentioned this on a lot of streams and whatnot, so if you're a stream viewer, you probably heard me say this, but I struggle to read my comment section because they're just so, like, shitty a lot of the time. And that's not, like, me trying to be mean necessarily, but it's just kind of draining to read from... God, there's so many reasons. Let me just put it that way. There's so many reasons it's hard to read. Oh, what the fuck? Okay, my OBS decided to appear on my main monitor there. Sorry about that. Hold on. Infinite Cool Kid Generator? Infinite Cool Kid Generator. That's crazy. You can even see all the different sources I use. Anyway, oh, I have the red arrow here still. Anyways, Infinite Cool Kid Generator has been canceled. So I've been reading all the comments on this video, which has been very refreshing. Because when I first started YouTube, I loved that. I loved reading the comments. Like, reading all of the discussion and the feedback and all that stuff it's really important to me, and I really enjoyed reading it. But, like, after specifically DE doesn't understand Overguard, and then much more so the why new players really quit. Those videos just I couldn't do it anymore. How taxing, especially why do new players quit was mentally for me. Like, it's the only video I've ever locked the comments on because they were that bad. I would wake up to a dozen notifications from my phone every single day of people flaming either me or Warframe for things that were stupid. And I just couldn't do it anymore. So I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm locking the comments. And I still wonder if that was the right decision, but it was genuinely just like mentally terrible for me, waking up to that much negativity constantly around the clock, seeing it. And there was no way to avoid it because YouTube Studio would constantly show it to me. But being able to read the comments freely on this video has been great. Even with the dissenting comments that are, kind of shitty, generally they've been overwhelmingly positive and been putting forward a lot of unique ideas, which is why I've been referencing a lot of those ideas in this video. So it's just like, man, like it's been good to be able to read all this stuff again and interact with the community again. Reply and, interact with the comments and whatnot. Because it's just like, damn, I did miss this shit, I'm not gonna lie.
Beyond all that, I want to give a huge thank you to my YouTube members for helping to refund the cost of my Space Engine Pro license.
This shit was $70. I want to point something out. So, first of all, huge thank you to everyone on this board, obviously. If you're watching now, you're probably up here. At least if you're watching this on release. Space Engine Pro is $70 fucking dollars. And I read their, I read their EULA before making this video, because I thought that was important. In Space Engine's EULA, if you want to make a video with them, you're allowed to if you have the Pro license. This did have other useful features, like the camera path editor is part of Space Engine Pro, but it was just like, fuck, dude, this video is not gonna make $70. This is not gonna make that money back. But I wanted to use the tool and I wanted to make the video. Like, that was how I had it in my head. So I bit the bullet, and thank you to my members for helping, cushion the impact of
Members
that.
for helping to refund the cost of my Space Engine Pro license. And I want to thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all next time when we talk about Warframe's sweltering hellscape turned winter wonderland, Venus.
I am very excited for Venus's episode. It was a big inspiration for why I even wanted to make the series. Venus and Jupiter were the two big ones for, like, stuff that I thought was really cool that I wanted to talk about. So I'm very much looking forward to it. I've done very little research at the time of me making this because I'm recording this literally the day after this video came out. But I do want to do some stuff with, I want to do some cool stuff with Venus. It's a very interesting location, and I think that that video will easily be twice the length of this one, honestly. But we'll have to see how that shakes out. So this went on for way fucking longer than I expected. If you're still here, thank you, both for being a member in the first place, as well as for watching to the end of almost an hour and 40 minutes of me talking about a 20-minute video. I guess it's an hour and a half. I didn't read that quite right, but 20-minute video. I've been going on about this shit for an hour and a half now. I also do want to say, welcome if you're a new member, especially with the fact that at the time of me recording this on my previous stream, me and other members of the community, mostly other members of the community, gifted about 20 memberships just to people that were watching. So if you're here from that, welcome. Big thank you again to people who did donate those memberships. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully you'll find something interesting in this video as well as future ones. I also want to say, please let me know if you think this format works better than the previous one. Older videos, I'm still going to have to just watch through YouTube because I don't have access to their project files anymore. But the main thing I'm thinking of is doing stuff like this, where like right after I make a video, I talk about it. So it's all fresh on my mind and the material is more directly relevant. So let me know if this format works better in your opinion, or if you think I should, stick to the way it was before. So I don't think I have much more to say off the top of my head. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you again for being a member. I really do appreciate your support of this, awful YouTube channel. Thank you for watching. I will leave the dev commentary playlist in the description if you want to watch more of them. New content whenever I get off my ass and make it, and I'll see you around.